webinar and welcome to this webinar series offered to you by HVFC International. This is a webinar in our series Funders Focus, where we highlight the perspective from funders. And today we have with us Lee Alexander Risby. He is the Director, Learning and Effective Philanthropy at the Laudes Foundation. Before I hand over to Lee to introduce himself, maybe a couple of just general rules. This session will be recorded. Anyone who has registered will receive the recording afterwards. We will be recording also the whole session. Any questions that you may have during the session, please post them in the chat function. I have my colleague and founder of HVFC, Han Valk, who will keep track of the questions. And after we are done with the plenary part of the webinar, we will revert to the questions and for Lee also to react to. So with that, and I see more people are joining now. But with that, I'm just going to now hand over to Lee Alexander Risby. Lee, thank you so much for joining us today. And from
Thanks.
time, we're very excited and look forward to a very lively discussion on effective philanthropy.
Yeah, let's hope so.
I'm sure it will be, but over to you.
Okay, so I'll just give a brief introduction for Laudes. First of all, Laudes is independent family philanthropy founded in 2020, and we're focusing primarily on accelerating industry transitions for a fair and green economy. We work across four industries, those being fashion, finance, food, and buildings. And we also, across that, have a cross-cutting theme on labor rights and skills. And over the last nearly 5 years now, we've had about 600 partnerships. We refer to our grantees as partners. So you'll hear me use the word partners throughout today. And during that time, we've dispersed approximately about 375 million euros across those partnerships.
Thank you. And your role, Lee, at the foundation, tell
Yeah.
me a bit more what you.
So, as Director of Effective Philanthropy, I'm a member of the management team. The role of Effective Philanthropy in the organization is, in essence, to ensure that we are using the evidence that we collect and assess well to drive impact. Of course, in doing so, we're learning and improving, and also that we have the right efficient kind of front end grants operations to enable our programmatic colleagues and our partners to do the work that they need to do to drive impact. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. We've prepared three statements that we're going to discuss also with the audience, and I'll just share the first statement. Hold on. Yeah. So the first statement is effective philanthropy is defined by the depth of learning from evidence, not only by giving consistent, large, and unrestricted grants. Maybe just a bit of background. Lee was already referring to not or referring to the organizations that you work with partners, and you put a great emphasis on learning. But just for the audience also to see, if you look at this statement, could you maybe indicate by show of hands whether you agree with this statement? Or not? Okay. See. Lee, I think the floor is yours to also give your first reflection on this statement.
Oh, Nicola's asking for a repeat. Okay,
Oh,
so I'll read it. I can read it out this time. So, effective philanthropy is defined by the depth of learning from evidence, not only by giving consistent, large, and unrestricted grants. Okay, so I'm going to kick us off and say, actually, as always, this is a bit shaded. Uh, my answer to this, partially, I would say I agree. Um, of course, you know, learning from evidence is critical, but it's not the sole factor involved in being an effective philanthropy. And when I look at the experience of Laudes, and I also worked for CNA Foundation before Laudes, the predecessor foundation, other things come into play, whether it is clear strategy and having that aligned clearly with your mission and vision and the outcomes that you want to achieve, an organizational culture which needs to be nurtured and maintained. You don't just get there to get to important things like trust, psychological safety, having the right feedback mechanisms in place is a real must. And then, of course, your grant making processes and your organizational design has to be in line with the strategy that you want to execute on. And that may sound kind of like axiomatic in many ways. That should happen. But in many organizations, actually, that doesn't always happen how we think it should. And so, what goes on inside the house, inside the philanthropic house, as it were, really determines, uh, to me, a good part of being an effective philanthropy. So, it isn't just about the evidence and learning piece for us. And I mean, the going on to the kind of unrestricted financing part. Um, I think there's been lots of evidence that has come up in the last few years, particularly if you look back at the Ford Foundation and their build program, and they did two large developmental evaluations on that that showed that it does really empower grantees, it fosters equity, and it promotes innovation and gives people the flexibility that they need within partner organizations to deliver. But alongside that, of course, you need to have the learning processes in place. And unrestricted financing doesn't alone in itself guarantee that you're going to get impact. So it's a bit of a nuanced kind of relationship between various different factors that have to gel together to be an effective philanthropy. I'll
Right.
stop there for the minute.
Yes. Can you, I mean, you mentioned trust. Can you
Yeah.
maybe elaborate a little bit more on how do you get to that point where there is a trust? How do you do that at Laudes when you work with partners to actually build that trust?
I don't think it's that much different to building trust in our own personal lives. It is about actually building relationships and getting to know people and being interested, of course, in their work, asking the right questions when you're developing a relationship with a partner and committing to fund, and also, of course, seeking their feedback and checking in with them uh, at regular intervals actually to nurture that relationship. Trust doesn't just, of course, happen on it straight from the get-go. You need to work at it.
Yeah, yeah. Is there in that concept of that you're building trust that also requires a lot of honesty? And you mentioned just now in your introduction before that it doesn't always happen that organizations align their strategies and also to learning. Um, but that also requires a degree of openness also because sometimes,
Yeah.
as we know, in a lot of, in the work that we do, things don't always go according to how we envisioned it perfectly on paper. What is your experience in how do you deal with that when you have that with your partners?
Well, what we are doing and we are actually doing in this next coming year in 2026 is we are bringing we are bringing our partners into evidence sense making that we normally do internally with the programmatic teams, with our evidence and learning partner and my team all mixed together in a nice cocktail. But that's a kind of an internal cocktail for learning. If we really want to be understanding different perspectives, and actually bring those voices and bring that evidence to the table, because it isn't only evidence that you receive in reports every year. We only ask our partners to provide a report to us once a year. That isn't always the case in other philanthropies, but I won't talk to those for the minute. We really want to actually bring that to life in discussion, in debate. And so I'm really looking forward to build out our sense-making muscle, which we've been building internally for the last 3 or 4 years, to actually take it more external. So that's one of the ways in which I think we're going to be building trust actually in learning from impact, learning from evidence, and not making that a reporting exercise. No one can get excited about reporting. Reporting certainly doesn't fill me with joy. But I do get excited if someone says, "Okay, come on, let's look at this evidence together." That's much more interesting than you asking me, "Okay, Lee, you've got to report to me in 6 months, and I want to see X and Y written down, and I want to know how well you've done, or did you deliver what you promised to deliver?" That's more of an accountability mindset and more of a compliance mindset, when actually what we need, given the complexities of everything that we deal with now in philanthropy and life, we need a more learning, more improve mindset to actually, get to the impacts that we want, but also in doing so, foster the relationships that we need to do that.
Right. And I then assume that that is also something that you give ample space to when you work
Yeah.
with partners to actually, because as you said, that takes time. It's not a linear process.
Well, yeah, I mean, we also have had running for the last uh, 2 or 3 years now our partner learning fund, which provides small amounts of funding on top of the grants that we give out to our partners, to either learn individually or learn together in communities of practice. So we have a community of practice stretching across our finance and buildings work called FIBE that's been running for quite a number of years now. And what is, I think, quite beautiful about that is most of this work is self-organized and self-run by those partners, with or without Laudes staff being involved in those meetings, although we are to some extent. And I think that gives partners the space they need also to exchange with each other, and also get past, I think, in the past, some of the competitiveness that sometimes can exist between partners. We don't need that, actually. We need to collaborate.
Yeah. Can you explain a little bit more than what the role of Laudes is? Like, what role do you take in that whole process? You just said that we also create space for partners to learn together,
Yeah.
but they will also learn with you, with.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the design of the grant that we give out through the Partner Learning Fund. So some of it can be focused on actually building a partner's internal capacity to assess and learn from evidence, and kind of improve the effectiveness of their own processes to kind of squeeze as much as they can out of their evidence base and use that appropriately. And at other times, it's coming together, where we developed this sub-fund, under Effective Philanthropy, because we saw a gap 3 years ago in that a lot of this work was needed and not funded, particularly when you're giving individual grants to individual partners. It's quite difficult to do cross-partner work uh, on making sure that actually they're bringing together their experiences. Yeah,
Yeah. So it's not just about the individual learning, but it's
yeah,
actually bringing together those learnings and sharing, and also sharing what Laudes as a grant maker
yeah.
is learning in the process.
Well, we're doing that. We've been doing that. more and more over the last year, uh, given that the areas that we work on and the funding that we're giving is a little bit longer term, and it takes time for, I would say, the evidence and the learning that you can share um, to mature. So we just actually started sharing more of what we're seeing collectively and some of the insights that we've had from previous internal sense making and now putting that out on our website.
Right. Before we move on to the next statement, there is a question from the audience,
Yes.
and we thought we just look at that question now, Han.
Thanks, Kenneth. And we got this very good question, Lee, because you were talking about trust building, and the question is asked. We get it that trust building is possible once there is an established relationship. But how do you get started when there is no relationship between the organization and you yet? So how do you get started? How do you get being seen by you?
Okay, all right. That is a good one. Um, I'll try, yeah, given that I don't have one of my programmatic colleagues here in the room to answer in detail, I think how we do a lot of our funding and give a lot of funding out is we do not, for example, do very structured requests for proposals. We tend to look for our partners through networks and we build up relationships, as I said, through discussions and often through being networked by others who were already funding. And um, that process of aligning around strategy and looking at each other's kind of strategic and area focus, obviously, um, that takes quite a bit of time. It usually takes a good few months and meetings to do that. And we looked specifically for alignment between our theory of change, which is on our website and quite clear, and a partner's strategy and theory of change, and start the discussion from there. And we're also quite clear, I think, in um, being quite attentive to communicate to partners quite clearly where there isn't that alignment and to give a kind of clear yes or no on whether a discussion is worth pursuing and going forward.
Thank you. And then one final follow-up question before we go to the next topic then. But in that, is there also like specific angles in the world that you look into, specific regions or specific
Yeah,
types
most
of
of our
partners?
yeah, most of our work being focused on those four industries is in Europe, and the fashion work also extends into South Asia, so India, Bangladesh, um, and Vietnam, Indonesia, among others. Yeah, a little bit of work in Africa. We've got some of our work on fashion, recycling, and waste in Ghana. We're actually one of the largest secondhand markets in clothes is based in Accra, so we work there. And some work on organic cotton in Tanzania. But most of the finance, the building work, building industry work, and food is based in Europe.
Right. All right, we'll move on to the next one. I'll share my screen, but we'll also put up the second statement in the hold on in the chat so people can see the statement. So the second statement is oops, sorry. Rigorous monitoring and reporting leads to better outcomes. I'll just enlarge my screen a bit. I'm not sure if everyone can now see the second statement because I understand the first one didn't fully show. Yeah. So yeah, rigorous monitoring and reporting leads to better outcomes. Maybe just a show of hands first from the audience. Would you agree with this statement? I'm not sure if can't really see who's holding up hands, but yeah. All right. Lee, over to you. What do you think? Does it indeed lead to better outcomes if the more rigorous the monitoring reporting, the better in terms of outcomes?
Yeah, I'm with probably with Jeroen uh, and Francesco in between no and not necessarily on that. I think my experience, and before I came into philanthropy, I worked for many years in the World Bank and the African Bank Development Bank system. I think that it can, but only if it's designed with learning and adaptation in mind and not control. I think, again, monitoring and reporting are, as I said earlier about reporting, doesn't fill me with excitement. Monitoring would certainly fill me with a lot of dread. Um, so they often don't lead to better outcomes because they don't necessarily produce information that is either useful or used, or even when it is, it can often be ignored. Why? It might arrive too late. It might arrive in the wrong format. Um, so it's not real time. So it doesn't inform the right discussions or decision points at the right moment. And it can be a burden. And we know that. And the other thing that I touched on briefly in the answer to the first question about psychological safety and trust and trying to foster more openness about learning from failure, and we all fail a lot, um, is that monitoring and reporting don't enable that in their more traditional forms. Uh, we use in Loud, just to give you an example from Loudest, what we do now. I mean, we have a developmental evaluation that runs um, year on year in real time, assessing our strategy in real time. And we do um, and synthesize a lot of data across from our partners from their learning reports, which they only submit once a year. So it's not so onerous. We're not asking them to submit something every 6 months or every 3 months. And we're also doing context monitoring, where we're involving our program teams to actually give us feedback into the evaluation process about what they're seeing in the industries that we're working on in relation to the areas of our strategy that are relevant to our work. And when we're able to bring that together and mix that together and then discuss it together. Um, and so the evaluation or the measurement and work is done together. It isn't done to you.
Mhm.
So to me, when I look at the statement, and I instantly think about, okay, this is really traditional kind of, I'm reporting to you. I'm not doing this with you. I'm giving you something. And I may not necessarily get a chance to discuss it with you. So it can be also rather extractive.
Yeah. Do you know, I mean, you also have peers, other grant making
Yeah.
organization. Is this something that other, grant making organizations are also picking up on or working in this way? And are you also learning with them, if that is the
Yeah,
case?
I mean, there are various groups working across philanthropy now to address the lack of, I think, satisfaction around um, reporting and monitoring, realizing that it is not always the right instrument to enable good decision making adaptation. And that also revolves around, I think, as I implied in a couple of minutes ago, if you're asking your partner to report to you every 3 months, but the grant is very short, or the grant is very long, and you're more of a systems-based funder, uh, often you won't see much change if you've got a very short cadence to your reporting cycle. But at the same time, for your partners, they're putting in a lot of work and time to put in these reports. And to me, it's one-way traffic. It doesn't allow for that exchange and discussion and two-way feedback that needs to take place to get us to learn. And if we actually think back to our best learning experiences individually, whether they're at school or outside of school and at home, and you think back to those times, it wasn't about monitoring and reporting. What that learning exercise and improving is almost never about that. So it's somewhat of a bureaucratic accountability exercise that we need to get away from. And I'd rather our partners be accountable to learn with us and also internally get that going rather than bring down a rather hard hammer of accountability.
Yeah. Just for because you also mentioned, and I think as you say, that goes for life in general. We learn most from our mistakes, big and small. Um, but do you have any tips maybe also for our audience? Like how do you internally actually create a culture that allows for failure and to be open and learn from failures?
Well, about 4 years ago, we introduced after action reviews in Laudes, and they were adopted very, very quickly across our program teams. Um, and they're used not just when we are um, looking at programmatic work, i.e., looking at grants, but even when we're doing processes internally to improve our organization, we use after action reviews periodically, um, not just at the end of an action, to sense check, okay, how well are we doing? And also it gives a forum to discuss, okay, if we've made um, slip ups here and there, as a team, we can come together and discuss them. And what we normally do is actually get someone from outside the team to be the facilitator. And usually the ground rules are we all take off our hats in terms of our titles, and we come into the room and we are together, we're all equals in that room. And so that has been a useful and quick tool because you can do an after action review at any time and it takes around 30 minutes to do it. And it's mostly a verbal exercise. If you do, you can note some things down. We've got templates and so on, but you can also do it without having to produce a brief PowerPoint on your after action review. So
Right.
that's just one tool that we've been using. The other things we've done internally in the past, failure festivals are quite important. But I think also just for me as a management team member and the other members of the management team at Laudes, it's also about modeling what you actually want to see yourselves. So yeah, when we make mistakes, we talk about them. And it also helps if you talk about them. Sometimes it can be a serious mistake, but also talk about it with a bit of vulnerability, a bit of humor at the same time. And I think that also helps, again, shift the culture and open up the culture in a bit way within Loudus. But it's a work in progress. And as I said at the beginning, those kind of things, you don't just get there and say, okay, we've got that now, it's done. You have to work at it all the time.
Yeah. Before we move on to one more question from the audience, I was just also wondering, you said, it also takes learning as an organization, not just from one program, but actually
Mhm.
taking those learnings and both on the side of Laudes, but also of your partners. What would be the role of the leadership, particularly boards in.
Yeah, good question. Uh, Again, it's been a bit of a journey, and it's been a good journey for us over the last 3 years. We used to discuss and present evidence in our board or our investment committee using PowerPoints. Occasionally, back in the day, we'd even send long reports. Um, and of course, in a boardroom, you're sat around a set of tables. It's very formal. It doesn't necessarily generate the discussion and the depth of discussion that a board member or for us on the management team side, the kind of discussion that we wanted. We wanted to do, okay, we thought, okay, how can we reimagine this? How can we really get learning and discussion going well? And we also heard from our board members that they wanted more flexibility. And so we introduced back in 2023 what we call evidence fairs. We now call them evidence days because we spend pretty much the whole day discussing the evidence, um, where, like a science fair at school, you have the evidence up on a board. We have our programmatic colleagues being the host, maybe a member of the Effective Philanthropy team or our um, evidence and learning partner there as well as a kind of counterpoint discussion. And people can circulate around the room, standing up. And we give this completely open for a couple of hours. Often we have to stop the conversation because it's quite dynamic. And that has worked really well. And then we go in from those sessions into usually okay, what does this mean for us? The so what session, which is more about, okay, how do we adapt strategy? How do we change tactics? And so on. And that kind of way of changing up the setting so you can get in the right mindset to actually have a better discussion and learn better and use it has worked.
Right. Thank you. Over to you. There is a question from the audience.
There's a question from the audience and also one, I also have a question. So I'm going first because you were talking about the evidence fairs and failure festivals
Mm,
and the evidence fair and or the evidence day you explained.
yeah.
But what does a failure festival look like? What do you do? And who's invited?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We've only done one of
Okay.
those. Actually, we did it early in Laudes in 2021 during the pandemic, so it was online. Um, the process for actually doing a good failure festival is yeah, it's a bit more complex than you think, actually. I remember we actually at the time we identified the individuals across the organization, including our CEO. I think I was also one of the ones who was also doing a failure as well. So everyone, had a failure to share, and we worked with the coach quite intensively for 2 or 3 weeks
Mhm.
before the failure festival to really um, work on our failure. Sometimes actually you can dress up success as a failure, and and or maybe not, or maybe your idea for, okay, I'm going to talk about this failure isn't necessarily very powerful.
Mhm.
So what I found useful in it, and I'll speak from my own experience in working with that coach, was that that person really pressured me to be really laser focused on the right details,
Yeah.
um, on what happened, why it happened, how going into, okay, what we learned from this, what we could have done differently,
Mhm.
and so on. And I think that does indeed benefit from a bit of coaching. So you
Mm.
don't just, yeah, think about it on your own and turn up in the room and start to share. There's quite a lot of preparation that goes into that, and it really helps the person who wants to talk about and own and bring that failure into the room.
Mm. I love it. Yeah, I think it's a good idea for all of us here to do similar kind of sessions in our own
Yeah.
organizations. But yeah, and the question from the group was about you mentioned the learning reports, partner learning reports.
Yeah.
Can you explain a bit more what it actually involves?
Yeah. Okay. The learning reports actually, well, one of we ask our partners to report once a year to us. Um, what do we ask them to report on? So what is in that learning report? Um, we have designed uh, that template based on what our program managers, the kinds of questions our program managers want to ask, but striking a balance between asking not too many questions. And also within that format, um, it also draws on the measurement framework and approach that Laudes takes, which is using a rubric and rating system rather than KPIs. We do not use quantitative KPIs or metrics to look at how partners are contributing to change. And the emphasis here is on contributing, not attribution. And we're really asking our partners every year not only to give us information on how well they are doing and what they're learning, but also what they're seeing within the wider context of the industries or industry that they're working in. Um, and to look on and bring the external context a bit into that brief that they write and submit to us. And the other aspect that we are uh, beginning to, I think, bring in a bit more in a bit more of a structured way is being more flexible on the format. So not always focusing on a report, a written submission, but it can be verbal. Um, and so for some partners, that may work. For others, that may not work for them. Um, and I think it's important to offer those different uh, types of format because everyone, again, people are different and so on. And ultimately, we want to kind of move away from the R word, from the reporting word, more to, okay, this is a process that allows us to have actually good discussions around what is in that document or what the discussions we have in a verbal report.
Yeah. I think that all sounds like music to our ears, the audience. Less reporting, less rigorous reporting as
Well,
well.
there is rigor. There's rigor there, but I mean it doesn't have to be the traditional type.
Yeah, yeah. I think the reality, though, is that a lot of organizations, maybe including partners that you work with, is that they have a mix of on the one hand, the more, let's say, the traditional reporting requirements, and then there is the more innovative reporting that you do, and perhaps others as well. Um, do you have any view on how to, how to balance that, and how could organizations also maybe advocate for having more of these more flexible reporting systems?
Ah, okay. I think, well, often the monitoring and reporting reflects the culture of management or even the board and what they want as evidence or data. And what I found in my experience talking to other colleagues in other philanthropies is that sometimes people are stuck. They may want to adopt more flexible ways to learn from evidence and learn from impact, but they're blocked. And I think the benefit that we've had in Laudes over the last 5 years is wanting to learn better and wanting to explore um, and move away from more traditional approaches to monitoring and evaluation. So if you even take our adoption of developmental evaluation, which is more real-time, which also values experiential evidence, not just that is written into reports and discussions and doing the triangulation through sense making. That's to me an innovation away from the traditional form of evaluation where you would contract an external evaluator to come in, send them off, give them their terms of reference, send them off. They'd come back in a few months' time and either bore you to death with a 50-slide deck or a very long report, which maybe only a couple of people would read in the organization, and it would collect dust on a shelf.
Yeah, I think we have a similar comment here in the chat from one of the audience members, and basically saying that requirements of reporting and etc. does not contribute to improve the quality of work necessarily.
Yeah.
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 I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay.
Most of it doesn't actually, I think, in many organizations, and it's being brave enough to say, okay, well, we need to change that.
Yeah. Is that something also that you as Laudes Foundation try to share more with other funders who are maybe not there yet or are thinking about it?
Yeah, we do. We have a lot of conversations across the field uh, about this. I think many others are also going through their own change process. I also think with the introduction of AI now into um, evidence and learning practice in philanthropy and in other organizations, it makes it a bit easier. We are using AI quite a lot in our developmental evaluation and our sense making processes. We find it quite useful. It definitely speeds things up. It doesn't remove the human in the loop, and it allows us to be a bit more real time and proximate. And I think that will really help us as we go into next year and get partners involved in our sense making.
Right. Okay, we're going to move to our last statement. Han, if you would like to please put it in the chat. The trust and shared vision enable honest reflection, learning from failure, and co-creation of solutions for systems change. By now, we've had a lot of insights from you, Lee, and maybe the audience now may have a different insight in that too. So just wanted to see show of hands in the audience whether you agree with this statement. Yeah, see some slowly reactions coming in. I think we've already Thank you for your reactions. We've talked a lot already about a lot of things that are now in this statement.
Yeah,
I wanted to
we've
ask.
already answered it, I think.
Yes. Yes, we built up trust in less than 45 minutes. Um, but I just wanted to ask you, can you zoom in a bit more about on the co-creation of solutions in this part of the statement? How do you do that at the Laudes Foundation?
Well, the co-creation, maybe I would have put that statement quite a little bit differently at the end. I think to me it's what does it take to co-create in adaptation and not just adapting our strategy. And maybe I would be a better place to answer this question right at the end here next year, once we've gone through this sense-making process with our partners. Um, because it isn't just about changing or adapting our strategy every year or our tactics. If you're inviting others into that space to do it with you and do it together, they'll also have changes maybe that I would want to see ideally in the best situation. We're changing, they're changing, and we're riffing off of each other. That would be the ideal solution.
Right. Um, I'm just going to also, because by now I'm also a bit curious to hear what has been your biggest learning so far in this whole journey that you've undertaken in moving towards more learning based partnerships.
The first one is if you do not have first one, what enables all of this? I think all credit to Leslie Johnston, who's the CEO and on the management team with me. Um, Leslie helped open the door to really pushing and supporting and giving space for a lot of this to come up in Laudes. And we're not perfect. Um, we've just gone through an internal, which we're going to publish, I hope, at some point in the next few months, an organizational effectiveness review, where we've looked at things like how do we take decisions internally? How well are we leading? Um, is our structure fit for purpose for our strategy? Going back to that point I made at the beginning around organizational design isn't always aligned with your strategy. Hence, you get this happening and a lot of unhappiness actually within the organization. I think looking at those things and how they tie in and support the right culture generally, and that culture is also about a learning culture, um, is something that is really about relationships and really about managing properly and doing change management um, and tweaking to the organization um, over time. So, becoming a learning philanthropy is not really about evaluation in the slightest. It's not really about monitoring
Mhm.
or templates for learning reports. It's about your organizational culture, your leadership. If you don't have all those things in place, uh, and you're not also dealing and not making things too hierarchical, you can have all the great methods you like. You'll probably end up not learning very much.
Yeah, but I also hear you say it does also requires at the top someone or
Yeah,
a group of people
it
deciding that.
does.
uh,
I think, well, in most organizations, I think people take signals from the management team, and people take note of whether you walk the talk on things. So I think for us, we have been trying to walk the talk. As I said, that isn't always a perfect process, um, and it shouldn't be.
Mhm.
Um, and we're still trying to do that.
Right. We have two more questions from the audience. Han?
Yes, that's correct. The first one has to do, you mentioned trust building and trust building in a partnership setting. Uh, in the comparison with real life, where you build trust between two people, that is, I think, clear. But in this case, there is some imbalance because one is the funder and the other one is the grantee or the possible grantee. How do you see the role of that imbalance in the whole trust building, and how do you see your role in that?
That's a great question. And yeah, of course, there is always, first of all, I think is to acknowledge that there is always, Francesco, going to be that power, okay, or that imbalance, whether it is acted upon, whether it is implicit or explicit. And just acknowledging it, I think, is a good start, because certainly that imbalance can cause, yeah, I would say performative perversions in um, in relationships, and particularly when it comes to talking about impact and
Mhm.
about what's changed and what one has contributed to over a period of time. And so it can't completely go away, I think, ever. But certainly going back to the earlier answer, certainly getting to know your grantees, getting to know where they stand. We spend quite a lot of time within Laudes, formally interacting with partners, but also creating informal spaces for interaction, whether that is when we're in Amsterdam or in London or whatever, having partner dinners, also going out. Recently, we had a board meeting in London, and we were with some of our building partners, and we went out to one of the estates to look at some of the um, sustainable buildings that have been put up with a range of different partners there. And that actually creates space and rapport
Mhm.
for better discussions. And what I was really impressed with that particular event was, we got actually a bunch later on of partners together. We were discussing some of the issues around finance and the availability of finance for retrofits in buildings. And we had people from the finance industry and the building industry together with our board and with our management and others. And that was a really, I reflected on that as a really open and useful discussion where that power imbalance was somewhat was not as apparent or not as like sitting in a corner of the room looking over us. Uh, I don't know whether that answers your question completely. It's not an easy thing to get around, but I think we try and get around that and try and meet our partners where they stand as much as possible.
And do you have any advice for the other side of the table on how they should deal with this?
Be yourselves.
That's short. Yeah.
Yeah, I always try and turn up as myself. I think that always helps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Good suggestion. And then the last question in the chat has to do with co-creation and how do you see your role when the project has started? So in the implementation phase of a project, do you see a role for yourself in co-creating and
Well, I won't speak. I'm not a program manager on the Program
Mhm.
X side, but I do know what our program managers do when it gets into the implementation. They work with partners and they're in contact with them um, regularly, I'd say verbally. Um, Sometimes I think, and as I mentioned, we're also, creating these opportunities actually for partners to interact with us um, and different people up and down Laudes and so on, in informal settings as well as formal settings. And during implementation, that is a period, I think, always of, constant tuning up and tweaking and adapting. And I think we tend to do that quite well. Sometimes I think in the past we've had feedback, again, depending on the partner, depending on the program, or the individual program manager. Sometimes that can be seen as just right. Other times it can be seen as somewhat intensive. And these relationships, I think, again, from my position, I also sit on the board of the Center for Effective Philanthropy in the US, of course, and they have their grantee perception survey. A few years ago, they came out with an article which I still refer to and I refer to now, which is that these relationships between a grantee and a program manager or program officer in any philanthropy, they are individual to that relationship. And you might have a range of different relationships, of course, that vary by individual. And when it comes down to being, from our side, a good program manager and having a good relationship, we do quite a lot of work on the inside. And I was mentioning our organizational effectiveness review that we've done. We've done things like Clifton Strengths across the organization, to get a map of our entire strengths. That then can give you a window into, well, what do we need to improve? What do I need to improve as an individual to manage better, to interact better? What do some of the program managers also need to do on their side? But first of all, you've got to have that kind of, I think, inquisitiveness to do that kind of organizational psychoanalysis.
Yeah. So maybe just to summarize, I think the takeaway that we would get from this webinar is that, yeah, it takes trust. There is co-creation involved and learning from failure, but that is not like a one-off activity. It's something that is, throughout the partnership that takes place on different levels, and at different phases of a project or a program. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
often say people are not projects, because, philanthropic projects, they're made up of people, and it's just a bunch of relationships that we need to work on together to get to impact.
I think that's a beautiful closing statement, because I think we sometimes tend to forget that when we are wrestling with our Excel sheets and and and
I
filling.
hate Excel, by the way.
Okay. But thank you so much. Also, thank you for all the participants making the time at the end of at least a day here, almost in Amsterdam. But also, thank you so much, Lee, for joining us. I think, yeah, to use the word, I think we all learned a lot. And with that, we're going to close this webinar and wish to thank you all and have a great evening or rest of the day, depending on where you are.
Okay. Thanks very much.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.